Hey there folks, welcome to today's episode. Today we're taking a look at 5 classic Nintendo 64 first-person shooters that you can play on Xbox GamePass in 2025. Just a quick note, I'm only talking about playing on the Xbox Series X because that's where I captured all the gameplay and that's all I really know. I don't have a Series S and I don't play on Xbox One variants anymore, so mileage may vary to your experience on those. I can't comment on it. Everything I'm showing and talking about here pertains to Xbox Series X, just so you know. With that being said, let's get to our first title. And the first title on our list is Doom 64. Originally released for the Nintendo 64 in 1997 and then remastered by Nightdive Studios and released in 2020. So you're going to hear the word nostalgic a lot because this entire list is very nostalgic for me. I grew up with the Nintendo 64 and Doom 64 was one of the earliest Nintendo 64 games I played. When my cousin brought his Nintendo 64 over from California, visiting us in Oklahoma, he brought over Turok and Doom 64 and that was such an exciting time for me. I was blown away as a kid playing that on our 27-inch tube TV or CRT back in the day. Man, there was just nothing else like it. There was just something magical about those times. While Doom 64 is technically a spin-off in the series, it was the first Doom to be built from the ground up on a console, whereas all the other console ports of Doom were just that, they were merely ports of the PC versions. Doom 1, Doom 2, and then Final Doom. Aside from the fact that Doom 64 was a console-exclusive game at the time, what also separated Doom 64 from the rest of Doom actually goes back to the Sega Saturn and PlayStation versions of Doom. Particularly Aubrey Hodges, who did the sound effects and music across all these games, all the way up to Doom 64. The gun effects, the monster effects, the soundtracks are completely different from the PC versions. They're darker, grittier, and scarier, especially the soundtracks. Pretty much Aubrey Hodges ditched the faster-paced metal soundtracks and replaced it with ambient, creepy, disturbing, atmospheric soundtracks. Me personally, I love it. I've always preferred the darker, scarier Doom over the metal action-packed Doom. Don't get me wrong, I love the way they re-embraced their roots with Doom 2016 and beyond, but I really do love the dark, scary Doom that Aubrey Hodges brought to the table. And Doom 64 clearly embraced that. The game is very dark, very creepy. With Aubrey Hodges' work, it really is something to behold. Now, this remaster from Nightdive Studios of Doom 64 is brilliant. Buttery smooth 60 frames per second, lots of graphical options, the image quality is great, it really does look and play better than it ever has before. But what's brilliant about it that Nightdive Studios are masters at is there's no nostalgia lost. It looks like you remember, yet it plays way better. That's what I love about Nightdive Studios' work. They always maintain the nostalgia, but they update it to where it feels great. And like I said, Doom 64 is hugely nostalgic for me, so that's very important, and I'm a happy camper with how they did this. While you have the likes of Final Doom being a, expansion to Doom 2, which is really cool and all, especially having it on the PlayStation at the time, but Doom 64 was a brand new Doom experience, a whole new game. Whole new redesigned, more detailed sprites of weapons and monsters, completely brand new levels and story. It really was a brand new Doom. And that was a big deal at the time, because Doom 3 later on fully embraced being dark and scary with its horror elements. Now, one funny little gripe I've always had literally since I was a kid, because I grew up with Doom 2, I'll never get over how the super shotgun doesn't have the proper reloading animation the original had. It just recoils back and you only hear it, whereas in the original you see him actually pop the shells into the barrels. It's an old gripe I've had since I was a kid, but I just wanted to mention it. This was such a cool Doom, I viewed it as Doom 3 until the actual Doom 3 were to come out later, which I think this was clearly a stepping stone towards, with how much darker and scarier it is. With it looking fantastic, silky smooth frame rate, tight controls, this is the quintessential way to re-experience Doom 64 or experience it for the first time. Doom 64 has been a classic for many years, you should check it out on Xbox GamePass. And next we have Quake. Released for the Nintendo 64 in 1998, and this Nightdive Studios remaster released in 2021. Now, some of you may not have been aware, but the way you access Quake 64 within this Nightdive Studios Quake, it's actually a mod that you activate through the add-ons option. You scroll down to Quake 64, download it, activate it, and boom, now you have Quake 64 playable. And it even has some new content. The graphical options here are through the roof. There's tons of bells and whistles you're able to activate or even deactivate if you choose, including a crazy CRT filter. I'm not a huge fan of the CRT filter because it's a little much, but it is interesting. If you have a compatible TV or monitor, it plays upwards of 120 frames per second and it feels incredible. So back when I was a kid, I didn't really have a good option or way of playing the first Quake until I got the Quake 64 port. So that was my way of playing the first Quake back in the day. So playing this is very nostalgic for me. But what's really cool, because of Nightdive Studios, all the bells and whistles that you have in the graphical options are really, really sick. All the added lighting effects, improved animations and textures of the monsters and weapons, everything is improved while still maintaining just enough nostalgia where it's like you remember, but way better. On top of that 120 frames per second frame rate, it's incredible. Now, one of the things that sets itself apart from Doom 64 is the ability to play co-op with a friend. It's a blast. My cousin and I checked it out online, and it's great. What's really fascinating about Quake as a franchise, it's a Doom clone from the creators of Doom. And it's always had a medieval feel to it, particularly the first game. The second game goes more of the alien cyber route, which we'll get to that in a minute. But the first one really does have a ton of medieval elements to it, or like a cyber medieval, which is interesting since you got Doom Dark Ages coming out here in the near future. So it really is unique. The way the guns feel and look, the enemies, you literally have knights coming at you swinging swords and monsters. It feels like dungeons and castles, and it's really dark and gritty everywhere. It's a really interesting, unique experience. There's really nothing like Quake other than, well, maybe Doom. But even from Doom, it feels a lot different. Now, there are some that like Quake better. There's some that like Doom better. I'm more of the Doom camp, but I really do like Quake a lot. And once again, you have Aubrey Hodges working on the Nintendo 64 version, so it has really cool atmosphere. The breakneck speed of the 120 frames per second frame rate, buttery smooth gameplay, playing co-op with a friend, fragging all sorts of monsters and beasts and these crazy level designs. You cannot go wrong with Quake. And this Nintendo 64 variant is particularly interesting for those of us that grew up with it that way. Either way, you cannot go wrong with playing Quake in any way within this Nightdive release. It's really, really awesome. You should check it out on Game Pass. Next, we have Quake 2, released for the Nintendo 64 in 1999, then remastered by Nightdive Studios in 2023. Easily, Quake 2 is my favorite Quake of all time, and it's one of my favorite first-person shooters of all time. It really is a classic. For me, fortunately growing up, there were actually quite a list of games that I got to play on PC originally before I ever tried them on consoles. And they were always mind-blowing and cutting edge at the time. Doom 1 and 2, Star Wars Dark Forces, Rebel Assault 2, Half-Life, and then there's Quake 2, which blew my socks off the first time I played Quake 2. The problem was, as it was always the issue with PC games, it was touch and go whether they worked or not. That's one of the reasons I fell in love with consoles so much growing up. It was such a relief to be able to just put a game in and it works. It was simple and straightforward, and that's why to this day, I prefer console gaming. Even though I have extremely fond memories of PC gaming as a kid when it worked. Because at any given point, we only had one PC at a time in our household, our family PC, and if something didn't work, tough luck, that's all we had. So I always had to fall back on consoles to be able to experience games when they became available. So getting Quake 2 on the Nintendo 64 was very exciting at the time because it was finally nice to be able to just pop it in and play it. Now, to be fair, it is very different from the PC version, which I don't mind. It's a different experience. It doesn't have the same soundtrack that's more atmospheric. But in this case, though, I actually prefer the soundtrack in the PC version a lot better because it is a really, really cool soundtrack that I still listen to this day off of the PC disc. Which, by the way, I recommend that. You're able to rip it off of the PC disc. It's an awesome soundtrack. It actually has tracks that Rob Zombie helped write, and they're really, really cool. Honestly, Quake 2 was kind of Mick Gordon before Mick Gordon, if you know what I mean. Really, really cool soundtrack. While admittedly, it is a downgrade from the PC version overall, I still grew to love the Nintendo 64 version, and it is unique to it. So if anything, it's great to experience both. And the fact that they included it with this Nightdive Studios remaster, just like with Quake 1, is really awesome. And they did it differently this time, so instead of it being an add-on and treating it like a mod, it's actually just right there from the select screen of all the campaigns you can choose from. Just like the first one, there's tons of graphical effects and bells and whistles you're able to choose from, a CRT option that's interesting, changing the colors from more of what it looked like originally to this more dramatic remaster, shadows and effects, and once again having 120 frames per second frame rate, which is absolutely fantastic. This is an incredible way to play the game. It controls like a dream. And that's what's really cool about this. As much as I love the Nintendo 64 version and I love the PC version, this literally brings both into one game. It makes it to where you're able to experience both at their maximum fidelity and then some, and it's really, really cool. If you've never played Quake before and you want to just jump to what people say is the best one, I would just say hop on 2 because 2 is an incredible game that any first-person shooter fan can enjoy. The feel of the monsters and the combat and the animations and the guns, there's just so much here that feels amazing to this day. It is a timeless classic. So Quake 2 Remastered on Xbox Game Pass, you've got to check it out. It's a classic. Up next is Goldeneye 007, released on the Nintendo 64 in 1997 and then re-released on Xbox in 2023. Now I'm going to be honest, this release isn't all sunshine and rainbows. There are some problems here. First off, some of the textures and the polygons in the environment kind of wiggle and jiggle around and aren't quite stable. And some of the music is a little bit off too. You'll notice that the bass farts a lot in the intro. It's not very pleasant. Now on the surface, you would think the frame rate should automatically be able to be better, but in this case, there's a little bit of nuance to it. It's a targeted 30 frames per second, and it's not a very good 30 frames per second because it's inconsistent. It has these weird engine hiccups and frame pacing problems that I don't fully understand. But the developer addressed most of these issues. Now, whether or not you want to believe them or not is up to you. But they said with the texture warping that it is in the original, you just couldn't see it as well due to the lower resolution. I don't necessarily fully agree with that. I think it's worse than it used to be, but at the very least, it is more pronounced. They said they tried to get it up to 60 frames per second, but they had to take it off the table because they ran into a lot of technical issues. Because they are running the game off its original code. So they had to pretty much abide by the game's original quirks. Now, I do understand and consider all that, and it is overall better because you have widescreen support now, 4K resolution, and it is a better frame rate. The controls feel really nice. They're better than they used to be. They did modify them and update them enough where it does feel nice. But what's really unfortunate is that there was a remaster of the game that was virtually complete, and they canceled it last second due to all the licensing nonsense. So it's really unfortunate that we never got to see this game come to light. It should have happened, and this is all the way back on the Xbox 360. But at the end of the day, it is an absolute classic title, and I would rather it be on here than not because the only way you were able to natively play GoldenEye 007 was on a Nintendo 64. And the game is such a classic, it still holds up really well and it's really fun to play. You just kind of get used to its problems, you get over it, and you play the game and enjoy it because it's still the game you love and remember. And to be fair, it's always been on Game Pass since the moment it released, and if you were already a digital owner of Rare Replay, you got it for free. So it wasn't like it was this $15, $20 game or something. They kind of just threw it out there. They should have done a lot better job, but I'll say it again, I'm glad it's here. I absolutely love GoldenEye 007. I've been playing it since it first came out back in the day. There's just something special about it. It really captured the essence of shootouts in 90s movies, as well as Bond. The guns look and sound amazing. The hit detection animations of the enemies are really hyper detailed for the time. The only reason this game isn't mature rated is because they decided to take any sort of blood out to keep it teen rated as a Bond game, which will change later with the next title. Now, I didn't get to play the multiplayer as much as some people because I really didn't have enough people around me to do that with, but people that love it really are hardcore fans of it. It is a blast. Beating the missions on the various difficulties within certain time limits, unlocking cheats, there's a lot of fun to be had, there's a lot to do. When this first came out on the Nintendo 64, it really was a technical marvel. Very large environments, a lot of detail, not a whole lot of fog so you can really see very far out. This game was beautiful in its day. And if you're a fan of James Bond, it is actually very authentic to the movie. It was easily one of the best, if not the best licensed video game ever made at the time. And it still holds up as one of the best of all time. So back in the 90s, particularly during the 5th generation of consoles, Nintendo 64, PlayStation, and so on, it was pretty well known that most first-person shooter ports on consoles were typically inferior to PC, give or take a few exceptions. And there were very few at that. Because back at that time, PC was the king of first-person shooters. But when GoldenEye came around, that was one of the shooters to kind of change that. And it really proved that first-person shooters can be really awesome on consoles. For me back in the day, and in my opinion, the Nintendo 64 was the best place to play first-person shooters for that entire 5th generation of consoles, and it was the closest thing to be able to compete with PCs. Whether you want to relive the classic or you want to see what all the hubbub is about with GoldenEye 007, you should check it out on Game Pass. It's an absolute classic. And before we get to our last title, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on the video. I'm excited to hear from you all. I read every comment. And finally, we have Perfect Dark. Released for the Nintendo 64 in 2000, then remastered on the Xbox 360 in 2010. So when this remaster of Perfect Dark first came out on Xbox 360, it was a digital-only title. Then it became backwards compatible on Xbox One. Then they came out with the Rare Replay collection that included it, pretty much just rehashing the same exact title. And then finally they gave it an Xbox One X patch that gave it a native 4K resolution, so it looks gorgeous. and it runs at a silky smooth 60 frames per second. It plays like a dream. Much like what Nightdive Studios is known for now, they did a lot of various upgrades to the graphics and details such as character models and environments, yet maintaining the spirit of the original N64 version where it doesn't feel like a different game, but it's certainly upgraded in every possible aspect. But I gotta be honest, playing this Perfect Dark remaster will forever remind us of how lame it is that they weren't able to get the remaster of Goldeneye out. It's just lame. But going down memory lane for Perfect Dark, oh man, it was so exciting back in the day. Obviously, once we saw the title, everything for the game, we realized, oh, this is no longer James Bond, but it's very much a spiritual successor to Bond with Joanna Dark. You have all the gadgets, all the guns, similar type of storylines, although it has some other crazier elements added to it, aka extraterrestrial. But what's great about Perfect Dark, they didn't just phone in doing a clone of Goldeneye, they improved it in every possible metric. They pushed that engine to its limits, more detail, more animations, just more across the board. The guns are absolutely fantastic in this game. All of them have secondary fire modes, beautiful reloading animations, the detail on the guns are great. The death animations are more detailed than ever with more blood and gore they added, so this one's mature rated versus Goldeneye. That was actually one of the things about not being James Bond anymore. It kind of opened them up to playing around with the content a little bit more, not worrying about having a teen rating. So they were able to be more violent due to that. The level design is really great. There's so many iconic parts of levels and shootouts. It's just a classic shooter. And once again, this is a console first-person shooter that showed PC, hey, we can do this too. And it once again showed how Nintendo 64 was the king of first-person shooters in its era. And when this came out, the Dreamcast was technically out, and the Dreamcast really wasn't great for first-person shooters, let's be honest. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love the Dreamcast, but it simply did not have the first-person shooter library to be able to compete with the Nintendo 64 up until the death of the console. Simply put, Perfect Dark, back when it came out on the 64, was a technical marvel on consoles. There was nothing like it. Goldeneye, honestly, was a stepping stone to Perfect Dark. The atmosphere, the art direction, they pushed the Nintendo 64 to its absolute limits with this game. Even though it originally always had a very low frame rate, that's always been the case, but it was still a very polished game. Considering how much ambition they put into it, it's pretty remarkable. Now, one of the great perks about playing this remaster on Xbox is the online capability. You can connect online with friends to play in co-op or team deathmatch. And the revolutionary thing about the deathmatch in this compared to GoldenEye or the addition of bots, whether it be by yourself or with friends, you're able to have a blast with this. I played the crap out of this as a kid. And having access to all this online is just icing on the cake now. It's really great. Whether you unlock them or access them through cheats, you actually have access to the classic firearms from GoldenEye 007. And in this remaster, they're completely remodeled, so they look completely different with a lot more detail. Now, I gotta be honest, some of their muzzle flares and the way they feel and sound are a little bit wonky compared to the original, but it's still very cool that it's there. I'll say it again, there are so many weapons in this game, you don't see this anymore. And secondary fire modes is a standard that needs to be brought back. I used to love this back in the day. With an incredible campaign, fun co-op and deathmatch multiplayer, the perfect balance of nostalgia and new tech, it's an absolute classic that deserves to be played, especially if you've never played it, or if you loved it back in the day like I did, it is an absolute treat to revisit it like this. So that was 5 classic Nintendo 64 games you can play on Xbox Game Pass in 2025. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you later.